Okay, thanks a lot for inviting me, coming here, very nice. So I'm coming from Ericsson, the Swedish company. Our main products today is mobile base stations. And you see radios and antennas up on the roof there, on the picture. And it's one of the main types of base stations. The other one is the tower, and you have the antennas and radios up on top in the antennas there. So, energy and carbon footprint, it's not only entertainment and media, it's also ICT, so IT and telecom also. Yes, touch upon this in the morning also, the emissions, the climate impact, the climate crisis, as some call it. I started to work in '94, so nearly 30 years ago, and since then emissions have grown by about 40%. And we have talked all these years about reducing emissions, but so far, not been that successful. 2020 though, emissions went down a little bit, but now we're up on top again, business as usual, so new record 2022. Less emissions may not sound so fun, less consumption, less production. But then, of course, in 2020, for me, it meant less travel, and I had more free time. So I think this expression, less is more, is good, is something. Of course, we are more people wanting more, richer lifestyle, but we need to reduce the emissions. And this is something that the Swedish rock star said, less is more. How can that be? More is more. He was a rock star, wanted to play louder and faster. You have this image. So if we look into some other sectors, so how do they do? Cars, they are actually a little bit better, but they're also heavier and more horsepower. So even though they are a little bit better, road emission almost doubled since I started to work. We have 2.5 times more vehicles. Aviation, there's less fuel consumed per seat when you fly, but then we fly 3 times as much. So aviation emissions have doubled. But let's go into our sector, the digital sector. So this is base stations when I started to work, 500 kilos. It had to be placed in a house, on the ground, near the antenna tower, consumed around 2,000 watts. Today, it's less, the weight is less than 10% of that, so 10-time weight reduction. It consumes a third power, but it has 3 times more capacity in terms of band. And then the bandwidth is actually higher, so at least 10 times more voice calls. And in terms of data, the number is like 10,000, 100,000. It's a lot more data. But of course, mobile networks, we started from scratch. There were hardly no one. But today, we serve 8 billion subscriptions. So all people on Earth, well, some has 2 phones, so it's not all people, but 8 billion subscriptions. And we do it for only 5% of the emissions of the aviation sector. And by the way, it's not only a few times per year as flying. This is every day for hours. We can compare it to old telephony. It consumed actually 4 times as much. Half of it in the phone exchange and the network, and half of it in the home equipment, the so-called cordless phones. It was actually, you had the base station of your own serving 1 phone, more or less, and the limit, the meters were not that great. And today, the average consumption for a mobile subscriber is slightly more than 2 watts. And of course, a smartphone, charging it consumes nearly nothing now when it's a dark screen, and only around 1 watt when you put the screen on, and a little bit more depending on what you do. Same thing about PCs and TVs. So this is what was my first PCs when I started to work, more than 100 watts, 25 kilos. And today I have like a little laptop that you have consuming only 1/10 of what it used to consume. The same screen size though, but much more pixels, so it's actually a better screen. And of course, in terms of compute power, it's more than 100,000 times better, at least when you look into the floating point operations, which is very important for today's graphic operations. TVs, that's the key device, I think, for you all here in the media industry. Still, kind of the king when you want to see something, a TV series or movie. So even though they are more than twice as large today, on average, the total screen size, they consume around half of the power, which is very good. So this was a little bit introduction to what we're seeing in the sector. Now I will go a little bit more into the details. How do you calculate the carbon footprint for entire internet and all the networks, user devices, and so on? Well, it's not that easy, but in a structured way, this is how we define it. So you have the traditional IT and telecom to the left there, and then the entertainment and media. As I work in the ICT, that's a bigger part of it. But of course, entertainment media have TVs, TV peripherals, TV networks. You also have some other consumer electronics like camera, audio devices. We have printers and we have printed media also there. We included them. And today we also see that the ability to communicate using networks are built into all electronics really. So electronics in vehicles, home appliances, manufacturing equipment, and so on. Tiny small modules. And the entertainment media products, they have since years had them built in, of course. Simple way to see it is, we have the user devices using networks to connect to data centers to get all the data and apps and so on. That's one part. Another important part, of course, when we talk about carbon emissions is that we need to look into the whole life cycle. Electronic products, you need to produce the printed circuit boards, you need to produce the cables, and we start with copper, plastics, and so on. Semiconductors, very important. About a third of the emissions is related to semiconductor production for the whole industry, even though the weight is like less than 1% of the total product weight. Not to forget, of course, for us is the aluminium frames we use around the radius. And for definition, we talk about embodied carbon emissions. So that is everything but not the use stage. The use stage is pretty simple to calculate. It's just electricity consumption times the emission factor where you run this, your network equipment or your data center and so on. So, this is how it looks like. The results from a study we did, it's based on studies by all manufacturing companies like HP, Dell, Samsung, Apple. It's actually more than all around 1,500 products in the database we kept since many years. That's the bottom-up study, as we call it. Top-down, we're looking at all the manufacturer companies. So Samsung, TSMC, also Foxconn, and all today, thankfully, all companies are very good at reporting their energy consumption and emissions, which let us then add everything up together. And this is the average we come up with. The embodied carbon footprint of a smartphone is around 50 kilos as we see it. For a laptop, it's around 200 kilos. And what you can do is you can divide it by a lifetime. So for a laptop, if it's 5 years, then you're down to 40 kilos per year. And then you can compare to the energy consumption per year. Laptop today, they don't consume that much, around 25 kilowatt hours on average. And that is 13 kilos. So you see that actually for a laptop, the largest part of the carbon footprint is from the manufacturing. And typically, it's the other way around. When you look at, for instance, a TV set-top box or a home router or network equipment or service in a data center, then 90% or more is related to operation, so the electricity consumption. And you see TVs and TV set-top boxes there also. And this is what it looks like if you multiply with what is produced in 2020 and multiplied by number of active PCs out there. Sometimes it's hard to know the number of active, but we actually know the number of subscribers, how many smartphones there are, because the operators keep track of it. Microsoft, Apple, and other OS companies keep track of how many active there are in use. So these numbers should be fairly accurate. And so this is the carbon footprint of the embodied part and the operation. And you see TVs down below there. Manufacturing, one of the largest comparable to smartphones. The sheer number of produced smartphones make the smartphones go up. But then in operation, TVs is still the king, even though they have improved, because they're on around 2 billion in operation. PCs, if you add everything up, PC displays and all the embodied, it's nearly as much as TVs. So PCs and TVs are the two big things. And this is how it looks like when we arrive at the top level results. So you have the usage electricity consumption. You see that devices are consuming as much as data center networks together. So it's like two parts there. Devices are all the user devices are the big thing. And this is just the ICT. We will see the entertainment media afterwards. But then you see that the embodied footprint of devices are nearly as much as the operation. And you see there's a difference between networks and data centers. They have nearly the same electricity consumption, but then data centers go down the carbon footprint. It's because we have the big players like Facebook, Google, Microsoft. They run most of the data centers today on renewable electricity. And you can, of course, argue, but that's what they report and so on. And mostly I would say, well, it's fair. And in terms of percentage, the ICT sector is around 1.4%. But it's 4% of electricity. And sometimes these figures are mixed up. Sometimes you hear 4% of the carbon emissions and so on. So, but this is how it looks like. Of course, very interesting to see the development over time. So the first study, published study, peer-reviewed scientific study we did was we published it in 2010. It usually takes some years before all the data is there, so you can do a study. And then we did a new study, 2010, 15, and 20, and so on. And as you see, it started to level off. So now it's more kind of stable. There's a little bit newcomers here, the surveillance cameras, and IoT devices, machine-to-machine, Internet of Things. But they are typically small and don't add so much to the energy consumption. Not to the embodied footprint for that matter either. So this is good. So we have sort of leveled off. That's good. And as you can see, number of fixed broadband subscription, internet use and so on has increased by a factor of 4. So this is, I mean, per user then, it's very good. And in terms of data, it's 40 times more data since 2007 in 2020. And each year now, it increases by around 30% the data. But data, I wouldn't say, there's very little connection between data and energy consumption. If we also look into how many phones produced each year and PCs and servers, we see it's quite flat. Service is flat if you take China out of the picture, but then China has grown a lot, so they are adding on top there. And also, if you look back to 2010, we were a little bit worried because it was growing, and we thought, okay, in a pessimistic scenario, we will go up. Yeah, we continue to grow. But then we did an optimistic scenario. Maybe it could be like this, a flat curve. And if we really do it, this is for electricity consumption. And we are nearly at that flat, stable line, which is good, of course. Here is the entertainment and media sector. The electricity consumption of TVs, TV peripherals, and TV networks are as large as data centers and networks together. So that's a large part of the entertainment media. And other entertainment media devices are really small today. And maybe you saw it, I didn't say anything in the picture, but a smartphone today typically includes the function of GPS and a media player, camera, video camera. Well, you can watch your TV on it also if you want to. So it has had a lot of impact, and I think smartphones are one of the big reasons why we see this flattening out electricity consumption. So last, of course, we need to look into the carbon footprint of everything. And this is how it looks like. Still the same flat, going down a little bit. Electricity grids are becoming a little bit less emission per kilowatt hour. Paper consumption, of course, a lot of media has moved online, so we don't consume as much paper for news, magazines, and so on. What else do we see? Yeah, you see I put preprint results here. The studies, the two big ones, have been submitted, and it was many months ago, but it takes time before they are peer reviewed, so they are not officially published yet. Well, you can actually access them on a preprint basis. So everything should be fine. I mean, looking good and fine. But then I've seen a lot of claims in media about, well, internet is a bigger climate threat than aviation. It's increasing fast because in data increase fast and all that. And streaming is really bad because then you use a lot of data, it's a lot of energy consumption. This is not correct, I know it is not correct. A bit of irony there, you can find incorrect information about the internet, on the internet, of course. You can do, as with many. If we start with the comparison to aviation, this has been since our first study, this is like it has stuck there in media, that the internet is as larger or larger than aviation. But if I take the ICT sector, which I see is you can add TVs if you want, but it's a little bit more than, but it's usually, they talk about data centers and networks and so on, so it's usually the IT type of sector. And it's actually so that only 1% of the people flying a year, this was before COVID-19, so we're not back on those levels yet, had more emissions, those 1% flying a few times a year, six, 7 times a year, than the entire internet, data centers, PCs, networks, and so on. And it's because you need to, it's not just the flying CO2 that comes out of the jet engine. You need to produce the fuel, and then you have some other greenhouse gas effects and emissions. High altitude effects, high altitude water vapor and methane and so on. You can see, and when we, as I showed you, the embodied footprint is included. But the embodied footprint, to my knowledge, has never been included for all the airports and all the aircrafts and so on in the world. And I guess it's pretty large. So this is like more of how it should look like. And then, of course, the ICT sector are used by more than 60% of all people for many hours every day. So we have a little bit of time here, dig down a little bit on the data, how it looks like. So data centers and networks are, all the user devices are very familiar. Everybody has one. So data centers and networks are a little bit more black box. What is it? So this is what we found out, the energy consumption, and it's based on data from companies. So it's really measured data. For data centers today, there's some 40 companies we track now, and it will be more in the future, consuming around 120 watt hours. If you just look at the big ones, you can see that Akamai and Netflix with the Amazon's platform they are using, consume just around 1 terawatt hour for streaming out and making downloads available of OS and game files and whatever. And that data traffic is nearly 30% of the global internet data traffic, what's going in the networks. You can also see, yeah, Google, Facebook has also more than 30%, but they consume a lot more electricity. So they must do something in their data centers that Akamai Netflix don't do. I don't know what they are doing. But maybe they are processing all of our data and make sure they can send a perfect commercial to us. Good or bad, I don't know. Anyway, these players, we saw that in 2020 already, 90% was renewable electricity. And then we have the same for the operators. For operators, we actually based the figures on 80% of the subscriptions covered by real measured data by the operators around the world. And it's all continents and all average there. And data centers and networks, around 1% of global electricity each. Could remember. And in my world, these two scale with users, humans that are using the internet and so on, when fixed and mobile subscriptions, and not data. So over this time that these graphs show, it's 800 times more data. But the energy has only gone up with maybe 40-50% for networks and less actually for data centers. Data centers has been improved a lot. Used to be cooling, used to be half of everything. Now, in the modern data center, it's 50%, 20% or something. But then we have some other sources, unfortunately, that they are older now and that claim that, yeah, there's probably a connection, data, energy, and CO2. But in my world, that's an incorrect extrapolation of old sources that you assume. And it's not based on real data from companies. So hopefully in the future we will not have these very large figures and claims going around in media. Finally, a few minutes left. Is streaming bad then? This is exactly how my own fiber looks like and how much it consumes. You have in my home there's a fiber modem and the home Wi-Fi router consumes 12.5 watts, actually 12.7 the average use. And then I'm plugged in to a switch, access switch, with a small form pluggable little thing consuming 1 watt on each end, so 2 watts for the fiber. Sit in the cabin. If you also include the fan, UPS, and so on, you're up to around 2 watts per household. And then in the small town site, the edge metal router there consumes around half a watt per household. And the core network in Sweden, since I work together with operators and Telia, I kind of knew this figure. Trust me on this one, it's around 1.5 watts. So if I put some data on this is how it looks like. So when I stream, I measure the fiber modem home router goes up with around 0.1 watt only. And even if I download a large PC game at more than 400 megabits per second, so I managed to download 55 gigabytes in 80 minutes. It only consumed 0.3 watts. If you try to do the same download on Wi-Fi, it goes up with 2.5 watts if you have a good signal, and more than that, more than 5 watts actually if you have bad signal. Wi-Fi consumes a little bit more. And then if you look at all the Netflix data, we see that if you take all their energy and divide by video hours, you get the figure of around 2 watts. So a Netflix server, it's actually Netflix and the whole content delivery network platform, consumes much less than if you put on a DVD player or something. A TV set-top box will consume 10 watts all the time. So that is probably not so good either. So, one source of this very large figure was this think tank shift project. And they actually claim that streaming consumes 6,000 watts. The TV consumes 200 watts. It's pretty much for TV, but the streaming part there. But later they corrected it. Oh, it was some kind of error and went down to below 1,000 watts. But still, 1,000 watts is totally unrealistic. And it is actually only, I mean, the network, a fixed network, if you include everything, we're talking about something like 15 to 20 watts for a household. And it goes, and it stays the same whatever you do near it. Okay, it's maybe not so good it's consuming that during the night, but if I look at my household, there's, I think it was 15, 20 devices always connected, and 2 of them are, I mean, smart meters, they are constantly talking. But even when I switch everything off, that's the consumption. That's how networks work. They have to be on and listening, so we have this response immediately. Same for mobile networks. And the good part is that it's actually not that many watts that's on all the time. That's the good part. And it's actually for streaming, it's actually the big TV that will consume. And of course, streaming makes it possible to use your tablet or why not your smartphone. And then you save a lot. So I think streaming is actually, well, the new low energy technology for delivering. Fiber networks will be like the thing of the future. That's it.